Good evening. Good to see everyone. We are in Titus chapter 3. We are picking up in the middle of verse 2. Why? Because we can't get anywhere in this book. That's why. Would remind you where we are in this book, just to get the structure down and understand what's going on. He opens it, and he's placing Titus on an island of Crete to work with a number of congregations that are on that island. It's in the middle of the Mediterranean, part of the Roman Empire. But it's a little bit isolated, and that makes a difference in terms of the nature of the problems that they're going to encounter. But the first thing he wanted to do, he said he's going to set things in order. And what that amounted to, when you look through the book, is, first of all, it needs to make sure that the proper leadership is in place, which is why he lays out qualifications for men who would serve as elders in those congregations. But also, part of setting things in order is addressing the error that already existed on that island as a result of the teaching of some Jews that were spreading some of their teaching from the Jewish literature that they'd had for many years. So having said we're going to address the leadership and we're going to address the false teaching problem, he comes into chapter 2, and you can note if you go to verse 1 of chapter 2 and to chapter 2 verse 15, and he bookends that with the idea of sound doctrine, of what you need to be about, and what Titus needed to proclaim and emphasize to them. And in between, we saw it begin, he left various categories. And he had older men first, then you go in and talk about the older women, then the younger women, and then we come to the younger men, and then finally slaves. And that essentially was the various social categories that you would have within their framework of living. That ended in verse 10. And in verse 11, then, you have a passage of responsibilities that apply to all of them. So while we might usually start with the overall and then go to the particular, he starts with the particular and then he ends with the all. So we see in verses 11 and 12 the emphasis on Christian living, of righteousness, and of soberness, seriousness. And we noticed how we see through the book good works and soberness, and that is a thorough, clear way of thinking about things, are two major themes that keep coming up throughout. He then ties that off in verse 15 by telling Titus he needs to go ahead and teach these things, to do so with authority, and he gives him both the positive and the negative he needs to be clear on. We then looked, as we move into chapter 3, and he's left that now. We've got a different kind of application he's making when he starts by saying, you remind them, notice again he says, remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work. And we see good work there at the end to emphasize, here's what your activity should be, but here's what you should not be worried about, is that you're going to live within a society. It has a government. You have rules to follow. You have those who are in charge that you need to be cognizant of and pay attention to. And he emphasizes the nature of the character they should demonstrate. We talked about how the word obey, submit, order yourself under, not recognizing in any way that you are less than they are, but that you are in a different role and you need to submit to them. The word then next, when he says to obey, is different because it really is to allow yourself to be persuaded to the rule. So you're to accept their position and to let what they're having to say have an influence on you. Why? Because ultimately what you should be more concerned about than what the government is doing is what you as a Christian should be doing, which is good work. Morally good, upright activity as God's people, and that we should be preparing ourselves for this end. The time period in which this is written, we're just getting to what's going to start being pretty tumultuous time in the Roman Empire. Now, Crete is a little bit isolated, but it still would have recognized some of these effects. So you've got society, you have what's going on in government, and then he moves on in verse 2, we started looking at, to speak evil of no one. The word is blasphemy, actually, which is the idea of slandering down and to treat them as just in a vulgar fashion. Don't do that. He couples that with the next word, which is, in the translation here, it is to be peaceable. But in actuality, it's a negation, which means essentially, don't be a fighter. Don't be someone who is always ready for a fight in character. So it's not about the establishment of peace so much as the avoidance, and this is subtle but important. He says, you should be obeying the government. What two things should you not be doing? You should not be speaking up in such a way that you're against people and causing people problems. And also, you should not act in such a way as to always be causing people problems. This is the difference between someone who feels like they always have to get the last word in and to tell you all the news on that person to bring them down. That's the first word. And to just act like they're nothing. But the second word is to don't be that person who seems like you're always looking for a fight. Now, you can do that in more than just a physical way. It's an attitude, right? It's where you're just going in and you're going to be so disagreeable, you're not satisfied unless you're kind of getting on someone's nerves all the time to see if you can't get to them and pull it out. So in the first instance, you're talking them down, and the next you're just kind of provoking them in such a way as to try to get some kind of feeling of hostility there. He says, those are the wrong ends. He just had said we should be about good works. Guess what? Those are not. We should not think that just going in and picking a fight with somebody or to go in and make sure and tell everyone how bad a person that is, to act like that's good works, because it's not. So we went over that. So now we've come to the next two, gentle, showing all humility to all men. John, you have your word studies ready. Yes, on gentle, which in the New King James is gentle. No, I'm on gentle. Oh, okay. I hope we're in the same translation, because that could get really confusing. I want to look at the next word, the term now. This is now a positive term. So it turns from the idea of someone who is, he says, you make sure you're not someone who is out looking for a fight. And he flips it on here, and we have this word that is gentle. Now, when you hear the word gentle, what comes to your mind? What are you thinking of when I say, that's a gentle person? Easygoing, good, that's easygoing. When I'm asking for an opinion, this is like the easiest question you're ever going to get. You cannot, think about how bad it is if you're going to get a wrong answer about what your opinion is. Okay, good, kind. Considerate, good, John. Power under control, right? You think you know what this word is? Have you checked? It's not that word. This is the word that is found in Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, that is translated in the King James moderation. New King James translates it as gentleness. We think of gentleness as kind of almost being a soothing kind of source, and to some ways it is, but this particular word is really hard to translate. It's lamb-like. Gentle as a lamb. Lamb-like. So stupid. Because lambs are stupid? Is that? No, they're not stupid. Okay. It's more than this. This word is bringing together two different ideas, okay, and combining them. It's the idea of you're 100%, you care about expressing care for the person. Okay, so in the process, that doesn't go away. You're interested in that person. You want to approach them the right way. You care about how your feelings. While at the same time, you are being 100% reasonable and rational in how you talk. Now think about what he just did in this word. In this term, this is why it was moderation. It's bringing these two together. It's where the content of what we should be saying, we should be reasonable with people and be presenting things in a rational way. Remember all the attention he's given to being sober-minded? So now in the expression, that should ultimately find its way into our conversations, how we talk to people. But it should be bringing our thought out in a rational way. So it's not where we're just kind of overly emotional in how we express ourselves all the time. And no, we need to make sure that it makes sense. We're putting things together. It's logical. But it's not cold logic. You know how we tend to have two kind of polar extremes of how we'll present things? They have the one person who is lovey-dovey person, right? And the answer to everything is a really nice hug, right? Anybody? Yeah, I don't see anybody out here that qualifies for that. But you know, right? Someone that'll solve every problem. A hug will solve every problem. Okay, very, very much the care. Okay, and then on the other side, you got the person that what we need are cold, hard facts, and they make Joe Friday look like he's an emotional person. All right. Those are the two extremes. Some of you young people don't know who Joe Friday is. So they're really extreme about that. He's saying Christians should be presenting these together all the time. That whenever we ought to be presenting Christianity and anything our beliefs, think about what Josh's lesson was about. We should be presenting the truth of the gospel, whether it's to someone who's not a Christian, or if they're Christians and there's a disagreement, how should we approach those disagreements, people? We need to be rational about the discussion about what God's word actually says. But we're also to care about the person and the relationship with that person as we explain it. And if you sacrifice either side of that, you don't have this quality he says we are all to have. Stan? Well, you're further down the road as far as the meaning. Okay, you're getting into significance rather than meaning here, but that's a technical talk now. But the application. So you want to put it out there in the best way possible is your point, that it has the right effect and it is presented the best way possible. Yeah, that is. This has a rational, thoughtful element and emotion. You know what he's doing? He's bringing together in this word. And Paul didn't create this word. It was just a word they had. But it's basically the combination of mind and heart. Fully integrated. Instead of kind of being bipolar about it. Where you just kind of, you don't go into a Bible study with a good cop and a bad cop. All right? Okay, you be all nice to them and then I'll slam them with the truth. No! You need to be. This is the term that was coined, I believe, over 400 years ago. Compassionately reasonable. Duncan?
This is the same attitude you were describing this, and I immediately thought to Paul's preaching in the Areopagus.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was very upset that the city of Athens was given over to idols, but when he was given an opportunity to preach the truth to them, he started, men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. He didn't immediately tear into them for their idolatry.
Right.
All the things they were doing wrong. He approached them very reasonably and very rationally.
Mm-hmm.
But also was guiding them towards the truth.
Right. Yeah. he met them on their terms for what they needed most. Right, absolutely. Okay, so now that I think we've got a handle on that, let's look at our next term, humility, which is not really humility. Okay? So when he says the next part, showing all humility to all men, but I just want to focus on showing itself is making a demonstration of. And I want you to think about how hard this is. The whole idea of this is it should be clear from your behavior that this is true of you. When he says showing, he's not saying putting on a show. Look at me, I'm going to prove how humble I am. It's not putting on a show. It's a demonstration from the basic character of how you conduct yourself in life. You are demonstrating this characteristic. But this characteristic is not the typical word you say for humility. This is the word that typically falls under a different word category. John?
Humility.
It is humility. It is on humility, but it's more than humility.
Yeah, okay, so my question is, the denominator has meekness, New King James, humility. The ESV translates perfect courtesy. And so, is that the same thing, or?
No, it says this is a word just like that other one that's hard to translate. There's some words like that. I would argue, okay, I'll tell you my opinion on this. I believe the King James got this best. But that doesn't help you that much because it doesn't matter if I say it's meekness if you don't know what meekness is. Now, John already gave us essentially the idea, which is it's power under control. I want to give you a little bit of a broader sense of this, and hopefully you'll understand why maybe each one chose to translate it the way they did. The core idea of this word, I think, is best demonstrated. One of the ways you study words is you're both looking at, when you're doing word studies, you're wanting to look at words that are in that same word, kind of word. So when you look at a word, you say, well, this is translated humility. Well, this word's translated humility. Okay, good. One of your first jobs is to figure out what is the difference between those two. You've got to figure out the difference if you're going to understand each one. The other thing that is helpful to do is to say, what is the opposite of this word? How is it presented in other ways that is, there's another word that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum. What I think the best way to understand meekness then is, it's been described, illustrated with the idea of saying a horse who's now, you don't want to take the power away from a horse. You want to make the power in a form that becomes focused and usable, okay? Power under control. For our purposes of what does it mean for your power to be brought under control? That's actually the next step that I think really matters if we're going to appreciate it. Because you understand, what kind of power do you have that needs to be brought under control, and who's giving it, what control are you giving up? Power. I didn't hear that. Your will, yes, your will is part of this, absolutely. But how is that different from self-control, which is putting the inner might to control your will, see? So, no, you don't get to quote me to me. That's not fair. That's cheating. The nature of this is, let me give this, it is moral ambition, or better yet, selfless ambition. And that is, you get yourself lost in a cause other than self. Now stop and think about that for just a second. There are two men who are essentially described as meek, one by Hebrew and one in Greek, that are specifically like this. One is Jesus and one is Moses. Now, look at what I just told you about this word. You are caught up and lost in a cause greater than you are, so much so that your life and the cause are so intertwined that you can't think of one without the other. I want you to see that I think that's what meekness really is. So the nature of the Moses, as an illustration to kind of put this together, Moses leaves Egypt as a murderer. In that sense, he had power, but it wasn't under God's control. It was, I've got my own ambition for what I want for my people, right? The problem for Moses was he had his own ideas about how to get Israel out that didn't fit with God's. So it was his own ambition about it. He failed miserably and spent 40 years thinking about that. And then God calls him to do it his way. It's the same cause in a way, but the mode was totally different. Moses needed to learn to get up in God's cause and let God's cause become his cause, instead of expecting Moses' cause to become God's cause. And you see that, of course, there's never any deviation in Jesus. Now, this application matters, I think, more than we often think. Because we can have all sorts of things we want to do for God. We want to do for the church. Meekness, the question is not what can I do, but what is the cause about that I can place myself within. We want to be on the outside so that people can see us doing the cause. Meekness says, I want to be within so that people see the cause. That's where the humility translation comes out in it. The whole idea of being willing to go and do everything and put yourself in it selflessly to accomplish great things. There's the courageous part of it. But on their own, it just doesn't capture just like it was hard for gentleness. I didn't really capture the word there. And it's hard unless we understand meekness, right, distinct from humility, to understand fully what he's capturing here of who we are. So now put this together. In relationship then to people, we are to be compassionately reasonable in our interaction with them. And in relation to Christianity, we are to be caught up in the cause. Where what I am about doesn't matter in the cause. It's about Christ. It's about salvation. It's about what God wants. And thank you for letting me be part of this. You see how different it is than when we just think about gentle and humble? And it just takes on a greater depth of what it requires of us deep down. He's not saying that having like a personal ambition, I want to be able to accomplish this. He's not saying that's wrong. But in Christianity, everything ought to be funneled through what is his cause? How does this serve his cause? Now, what does that, if we're properly doing that, what will that move away? What will that take care of? It's eliminate. You have to eliminate self to get there, don't you? While keeping self. It goes back to the will and the ambition that you still have, but that are in service to something else. What else? Phil?
If we actually reach that point, it goes back to Christ's prayer for unity. My will, your will.
That's right. That's right. It's the only way to have that kind of unity. And I've been working on lessons about this week. And one of those problems is this lack of ambition for the cause. And selfless ambition, we've let it be too selfish ambition. We've got let too much of the me problem enter in. And, you go through and you look at this and saying, okay, what are we all going to do together? And not get in the way. How do I keep myself from getting in the way of the cause? You know how many times we actually let ourselves get in the way of the cause? When personalities end up clashing, we're getting in the way of the cause. When we think we have to be in the forefront all the time, we're getting in the way of the cause. When we think I have to have it done my way because this is my idea and I had this, we're getting in the way of the cause. When we think that everything ultimately has to be that I have to be recognized for what my contributions were, we're getting in the way of the cause. On their own, it's not wrong. I want people to know I appreciate what they do in a congregation. To recognize them. I still think that's a good thing. But the heart that needs that and has to feed off that, that's a very dangerous place to be. In the same way as we need to make sure it's the cause. Otherwise, we end up getting competing agendas. Competing agendas, if you go through and you look at the works of the flesh, there's a series of those in the works of the flesh that is progressive in terms of division. Of where it starts, what attitude starts it, and then each one, it gets more obvious and more out there until it's clear. But it started with the attitude. And so what we have to make sure of is that in these two characteristics, that we really are deepening in ourselves and challenging ourselves, that in every conversation, I'm not just going to prepare myself with a good argument, but I'm going to prepare myself with a good attitude. You need both. Go ahead.
Some of the people that I admire the most, when I look back on my time in the church, you have to sit back and really look for, because they are getting things done and doing things, and nobody has a clue. There's no fanfare, they're doing it because that's what should be done, and they're not looking for any kind of, it's that whole removing of self. And I often think, when you notice that, it's not noticed and it's not intended to be people. I mean, with the right attitude, you're not looking for the fanfare or the notice. But when I look back, those are some people that I admire because I like to be like that. I like to be not a loud, obnoxious, I've done this, but I want to make sure that if I do something, it's because it's what was right for the cause of Christ.
Yeah.
And not because it was, I think that's part of, if you look at all this, the word appropriately has been absconded and taken away by PC people.
Yeah.
But if you do stuff in this whole, if you put all these together, you should be doing the work appropriately, which means that, like when Jesus prays, not my will, but yours.
That's right.
I'm sorry, I'm rambling on, but that's how I see
It is key, and the fact that we've now covered half a verse. That could be a new record. I'm not sure. I've got some of my Granbury Street people here. I'm not sure that's in the record, but it's getting close. All right, let's move into verse 3, though. There are a lot of words here, so I will probably be trapped here, too. But he's going to shift slightly, but not entirely. When he says for, he's giving you reasons why these traits matter. Those traits are how you're dealing with these other situations, because don't miss the end of verse 2, to all men. Everyone. Don't be selective about the people for whom you will show the best version of Christ. Everyone needs the best version of Christ from you. So when he then gets to verse 3 and says, for we ourselves were once also foolish, he's making a reference to all men. And what is he saying? They need this version of you where you are not talking the wrong way, you are not being obnoxious and creating problems, but you're willing to be patient with them, peaceful in your approach to them, talking with them, reasonable, rational, and that you are not trying to make yourself the center, but rather the cause of Christ that's trying to save their souls. For everybody. And what should be your motivation? What should you keep in mind in order to do this? Verse 3, you were once like them. You once were a situation where you were just like them in some way, and you needed what they need now too. That's what verse 3 is about. For we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. Well, again, we get another list that just keeps us tied down. We ourselves. It is emphasized here. We is in the text, and it doesn't have to be in Greek. So when he includes it, he says, for we, he wants you to underline and put it in bold, we were formerly there. That's what he's saying. We are foolish. It's senseless. It's basically non-thinking. We weren't thinking right. We didn't engage the brain about spiritual things. Remember all the things he keeps emphasizing about how they needed to think the right way, sober thinking, sound thinking. Guess where we used to be? We weren't thinking spiritually. We weren't spending our time thinking about how we ought to behave. You know, some people, you just kind of wander through life, kind of just feeling your way through life. Whatever's here, whatever's there. And just don't think about the consequences. Don't think more about, some people don't think about what life is about. Why am I here? What I should do? Why I should bother with you? They don't think about that. They're just here for them. They're going to eat it all up. It says, yeah, we were there. Why? Caught up in just what we wanted. Disobedient. Now, if you check this again, this is tied into that word when he said obey in verse 1. He told them to obey. The word is actually the idea that you are unpersuadable. It's because it's the idea that you're just not interested in being persuaded to something. And this, you think about how many people, when you're trying very hard to be rational and carrying with them, and that they're just a brick wall, that it doesn't matter how good the argument, it doesn't matter how well you've treated them. They're not interested in letting the brain move through the process to get to where they need to go. Some people, they just don't want to go there. If I were to listen to you, then you know I'd have to change all these kind of things. I'm not going to even go there. Well, that would mean this, and they're afraid. Some people are afraid of what they might learn more if they listened. So this is the whole idea of the attitude of sometimes you just didn't want to hear what God had to say. You didn't want anyone to reason with you or be rational about it. You're not going to be persuaded. You've already decided. I don't want to have those reasons presented where I could become persuadable. Because that means I've opened my heart up to the possibilities of the gospel, the truth. So it's kind of the idea of being closed off, we might say. You ever run into someone who just clearly they're just closed off from what the truth is and what the gospel ever says. They're not interested in that. And, you know, they might patronize you with a Bible study, but that's not really what they want to do. Because inside, they're closed, no matter how open they might appear. Some people know they're supposed to be open. It's really funny in some ways that people want to present themselves as being very open-minded. And the more that they emphasize how open-minded they are, the more you begin to doubt it. Because they don't seem to listen to anything else. Okay? He's talking about that problem of you need to be persuadable. And at some point, we just closed that off. We didn't want to be corrected. How many people here enjoy finding out you're wrong? Anybody? You point it out, you take a test, the students come in, they get a question wrong, and they said, man, that one makes me happy. I have yet to have gotten that reaction from anyone that's taken my test. So I'm glad I missed that one. What a lesson. Usually there's a lot of kind of moping and this wasn't fair and this, and I'm saying, I know I'm the teacher, I wrote it to be unfair, and you know, things like that. You can verify all this with Eric. That's the way we work. Okay, it's just we end up with a situation of we're just closed off, right? And we need to make sure that we're not letting that happen, because what happens next? The next word. Okay, very interesting itself. Deceived. This word is actually, again, get a little bit technical. It's a participle, which means it's both a verb and an adjective. It's describing someone who the description, it's a behavior that describes them. So it's hard to see this as being deceived as just an end point. It's just, they're just kind of, you just describe them as being someone who will take the wrong turn. The word deceived is the same word here where we go error, but it refers to being on a pathway and going off the way. Okay? You know, the whole thing about the whole idea, there's a fork in the road, so I took it. The person who is deceived will find the temptation. Think about my youth. Okay, we're going here. I'm in the middle of an illustration, so I'm going to give you a different one. But when you're young and you're traveling, I don't know how much my mom would do this, but I remember when I was young, we get to go out, and I love to be able to just get out and go on the hiking trails and stuff when we get on vacation and get to do stuff. I still enjoy that. But what the tendency was when you're young is, for some reason, the trail they've clearly marked and laid stuff out isn't good enough for you. You want to go explore. And you just have this inner desire to say, I know it would just be better if I could take that way through the poison ivy, down where it's kind of rocky and maybe a little bit dangerous, and that sounds like a better way to me. I want you to think about when you see someone in error or going astray, deceived, this word, that's what it's talking about. It's about we're going off course from where we need to be. There's no reason to. The right way is clearly laid out, but that's not enough fun for us. So it's going the wrong way with our lives. It could be with the way we think about the scriptures. I'm going to take off. This is a whole lot. Sometimes this is a shortcut, right? The way you ever been on those in the mountains where you have a switchback and you think, you know what? There's a shortcut here, and you just all you have to do is turn and go right down there. And you know your chances of falling at least 25%, but that's a shortcut. Okay. And that's the whole point of what this is. So what we get ourselves in trouble because we think we found a shortcut to Christianity, a shortcut to being okay with God. All those kind of things, that's kind of what this has to it. And then he describes it and says, okay, now we're going to come up with another word, serving, which is as a slave, which is interesting itself, that you were captured then at some time in your life. You were caught up where these things actually had control of you. And he lists two things: lusts and pleasures. What do you think he means by including both of those things? Lusts and pleasures. Yeah, it comes in different flavors, right? The word pleasure, to help, is where we get our word hedonism from. So we're caught up in the trying to feel good, right? It's one of those wonderful things where the Old Testament warns about following the dictates of your heart. Deuteronomy, Jeremiah says that's what they did to get them into trouble. And then, so they did it for idolatry. And then we have for today is you get things like this. You do you. Or you can, let's see another way. Well, if you're a Disney fan, you follow your heart. Right? That's advice from all your lovable cartoon characters. You need to follow your heart. You know, you got to trust. Or wait a minute, we got another way we can do this, everybody. Trust your feelings. Luke. You realize how much of the advice that you get, the way of life, just the general expression in popular culture is rooted around just make sure you feel good. That's the ethic. Do whatever you want to do. That's the desire. The desire is, what do you want? And everyone has an answer to that until it comes to where you want to go eat. No one can decide. Then you come back and you say, okay, now, but then it's the desire, the pleasure. So you've got the idea of the want, which is closed in on the desire, which is the will-oriented, and here you have it more on the external of the pleasure-oriented, which takes in both cases, all of what we found in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, doesn't it? 15 and 16, particularly 16. Manifold. That's not a word we use. Many, various, all the different ways in which you can be happy about yourself and get to do things you want to do. And what does he say? What's interesting? We think that I'm getting to do what I want to do. And what does he say that is? Slavery. Slavery. Macaria? Yes. Yes, Romans 6, verse 16. That, especially in the context of what we used to be. Very much so. Well, at least I can say I covered 2 half verses. Right? Right? That would be an embarrassing statement for anybody else. I can live with it. Okay, but we will try to finish up. The problem is that I will not be here next week, so you're going to hold right there in the middle of verse 3 for 2 weeks. I will work hard to get back from Missouri so I can teach that class in 2 weeks. Deal? All right, let's pray.